We are delighted to have with us Abhay, a poet, editor, translator, artist, and diplomat. Abhay is the author of numerous poetry collections and editor of the latest book of Bihari literature. His latest work, Nalanda, chronicles the history of this iconic university and its profound influence on the world. In conversation with him today is Milee Ashwarya, the publisher of the adult publishing group at Penguin Random House, India. An award-winning publisher, Milee has championed diverse voices, launched bestsellers across genres, and contributed significantly to building an inclusive literary platform. Please join me in welcoming Abhay and Milee Ashwarya as they take us through this fascinating dialogue. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just begin by saying that it's wonderful to be back in Kozhikode, and what a fantastic venue. Thank you for staying back for this session. We're going to take you into the fascinating world of Nalanda, and there is finally a good book on it that'll tell you about its history, the rise and fall, and how it impacted the world. So we'll begin with, why you wrote the book, Abhay, because you've been a poet and a diplomat. You've written several collections of poetry, and now this historical account of Nalanda.
Well, thank you, Milee, for this wonderful introduction to Nalanda. I don't know how many of you know about Nalanda, but precisely that's the idea, to write about this great university, great Buddhist monastery university, so that we get to know more about our heritage. Nalanda stands for knowledge, and it inspired the human quest for knowledge. Even today, there are so many institutions all across the world named after Nalanda. And actually, I come from Nalanda. I was born there, so I thought that it's important to tell the story of this great monastery university to the world, so that we know what has been our heritage and the historical amnesia which clouded our imagination for almost 4 to 5 centuries, between 14th century to 18th century, when we had completely forgotten about Nalanda. We retrace those contributions which this great monastery university did, and we get to appreciate our own heritage.
Oh, and like you said, you were born in Nalanda. You spent your early years there. How was it growing up in Nalanda, and what were the kind of stories or oral history and folklore that you grew up with?
Well, the first thing I remember everyone telling me whenever I visited the ruins of the great Nalanda University, that there were 10,000 monks or students there who studied and lived there, and there were 1,000 teachers. So this was the gargantuan number which we were always told, and we used to wonder that how come 10,000 people could live together in such a complex, which is right now there are 11 monasteries which have been excavated, and you can actually still see those rooms. They used to take us to the cells where monks used to live and study, the little racks where the books used to be kept, and a place for the lamp to study at night, and so on. So we were also, wrongly told that, you see the largest mound which is there, the largest structure is actually the library, the great library of Nalanda. And this was the second, myth we had, which were told by guides as well, that this was the library, and this burned for 6 months.
Yeah, I think that is a story that a lot of us
Yes.
have heard. Why don't you
Yes.
tell all our people, the audience here, a little bit more about what exactly happened? How did this massive library with such a rich collection of books and texts, got lost?
Well, so we know, the excavations, during the excavations, there is no trace of a library at Nalanda. But according to the Tibetan accounts, Nalanda had a great library called Dharmaganj. And Dharmaganj had 3 parts. It was divided into Ratna Ranjaka, Ratna Dadhi, and Ratna Sagara. And Ratna Sagara was 9 stories tall. And these were all sutra libraries. So there were sutras, the Buddhist sutras, like Pragya Paramita Sutra, which is 100,000 lines actually, these sutras were written on palm leaves, and they were kept in these libraries. And the fame of Nalanda was so great in 6th and 7th century that it attracted visitors from faraway lands, from Korea, from China, from various parts of Asia. And they used to come to the library to copy these sutras. Nalanda had a whole village of scribes who helped in copying these sutras.
Wow.
And how were they destroyed? The one popular belief is that the library was set to fire by Bakhtiyar Khalji when he invaded the monasteries of the Magad in 12th century. So there is a nearby town called Bihar Sharif, or earlier times it was known as Odantapuri, and this town also had a vihara like Nalanda, and that vihara was set to fire, and monks were beheaded by Bakhtiyar Khalji. That is historically recorded by a Persian historian, so on that basis it is also believed that Nalanda, which is just about 15 kilometers away from Bihar Sharif, must have been also burnt by Bakhtiyar Khalji. And there are eyewitness accounts much later, about 40 years later, by a Tibetan monk called Dharma Swami, who writes that how the Turks, the troops of Bakhtiyar Khalji who are stationed at Odantapuri, they frequently raid Nalanda, and how he finds a shelter, hiding from these raiders, but he does not mention about the library. So probably library was lost, or the monks who fled from the first attack took away most of the sutras from there. There are of course evidence of burning in Nalanda.
You still see the black walls and
yes, you can still see the evidence of burning at Nalanda.
Well, during this period, there were so many viharas and monasteries all across India, East Asia, Central Asia. But Nalanda had its unique place. It was really popular. It attracted scholars from across the world. Why was that? What was so special about Nalanda?
So Nalanda was in 7th century what Oxford or Harvard University is today. It was the center of learning in the world. There was no other, there were thousands of monasteries spread all across the world, but none was like Nalanda. Nalanda had, all disciplines taught, whatever the human knowledge, whichever disciplines human knowledge was possible, was taught at Nalanda. And the Chinese monk, he describes Nalanda, Xuanzang, who visited Nalanda in 7th century. He describes the monasteries in following words, that the towers of Nalanda rose to touch the heavens. They were so tall that from the windows you could see the clouds and you can converse with them. The red kanaka flowers, there's a flower called kanak, and Nalanda was full of these beautiful red flowers, and mango groves. So shades of mango grove used to beautify this place, and there was lots of lotus ponds around Nalanda. So it had a great campus, it had a great faculty. Most of the teachers who taught at Nalanda were renowned figures from across the world, not only from India actually, but so many of them, they came from abroad. In fact, the king of Sumatra requested the king of Magad that he through his ambassador in that time to Magad, that he should build a monastery for the monks who come from Sumatra, and he requested to donate 5 villages for the maintenance of that monastery. This is written in the Yashovarman inscription, which has been dug out at Nalanda. So Nalanda was at its time a very attractive place. If you could even steal the name of Nalanda, like there were forgeries during those times also, and the monks who could say that they have studied at Nalanda were venerated abroad, outside. So just the name of Nalanda, like today you can say that I have studied at Oxford University. So so that was the repute of the university.
Fascinating. Well, this whole world that was there, like you mentioned, was also because of the special teachers and faculty, and some of Buddha's direct disciples like Sariputra and others who really built a reputation for themselves in teaching the students and also created the disciplines that were there. What were their key contributions?
Well, Sariputra, who was actually, came from a family of great scholars, and the family which engaged in Shastrarth, in a scholarly debates. And he was the key figure of Buddha and promotion of Buddhism as a religion. He was the right-hand man of Buddha, or the chief disciple, along with his friend, childhood friend, Mogdlayana, and both came from Nalanda. So when Sariputra met Buddha, he not only met himself, but he also brought 500 other disciples from other teacher to Buddha, and thus Buddhism grew as a religion. Because imagine 500 teachers in 6th century BC, 500 students in 600 BC. It's a huge number for any growth of any religion. And Buddha designated Sariputra as his chief disciple. He was also known as the Dharma Senapati. So it was in his hands to canonize Buddhism, make Buddha's, whatever Buddha said into writings, make the discipline for the Sangha, and so on. And in 3rd century BC, when Emperor Ashok, when he adopted Buddhism, so it was him who founded a stupa for Sariputra in Nalanda. And it's that stupa which is the nucleus of the great University of Nalanda. So the whole university has grown around that stupa. And that is the tallest structure even today in Nalanda, which people mistakenly take as the library of Nalanda.
Yeah, I think we saw that, when we were there, and how it's like the center of the ruins now, still quite a structure, imposing structure in Nalanda. Your subtitle for the book is How Nalanda Changed the World.
Right.
So what do you think is the enduring legacy of Nalanda?
Well, so I came across this very interesting research done by other scholars. For example, Jan Beckwith, who has written a book called Warriors of the Cloisters, talks about how the modern colleges and universities have evolved. So his contention is that the college today, what we know as college, they come from the Buddhist viharas. Why? Because Buddhist viharas in Central Asia were converted into madrasas. And this madrasa, which had a system of a endowment, a physical structure, a building with a courtyard architecture, and an endowment, a patron giving an endowment, and various subjects being taught there. So this is how the idea of madrasa traveled from Central Asia to Arab world, and from there to the West. So by further research, I found that the architectural plan of the universities like Oxford and Cambridge, particularly the quads and the courts, which are in plenty, they actually come from the courtyard plan of the Buddhist Viharas. And this plan was standardized in the world's first residential university, that is Nalanda. So exactly you can find the courtyard plan of Nalanda at the ruins of Nalanda, and the courtyard plan of the Oxford and Cambridge. Actually, they are alike. And not only that, you can see that the same thing in other universities in like the world's oldest universities, which is still running in Egypt and in other places in Europe. That's one of the contributions of Nalanda, where the Vihara itself, a college, was founded by Ashoka himself in 3rd century BC, but it became Mahavihara, or a university, by the 5th century AD during the Gupta times. And Nalanda itself was not only a Buddhist monastery, but all disciplines were taught at Nalanda. For example, grammar, logic, philosophy, science, mathematics. In fact, one of the greatest contribution of Nalanda is the number 0. Aryabhat, who taught at Nalanda, was the first one to use 0 as a digit, which later was used as a number by Brahmagupta in his book Surya Siddhanta, and which got later translated into Arabic as Sindh Hind. And William Dalrymple tells this story how the Sindh Hind contributed towards the Indian numbers which traveled to Europe via a person called Fibonacci. And he traces this path of travel of the 0 and Indian numbers, and that actually happens at Nalanda. So that's the second fundamental contribution. But also mathematics. In fact, Aryabhat is the father of algebra and sine functions and algorithm. So you have these fundamental contributions in mathematics. In astronomy, you have Nalanda has a huge contribution in astronomy and has affected how astronomy was adopted in China. So this book tells you the story of how the great astronomers of Nalanda, who were trained at Nalanda, occupied the role of chief astronomer in China. And not only that, in the court of the Chinese empress Wu Zetian, these Nalanda trained scholars wielded so much of power during the Tang dynasties, in 7th century, that there was actually a kind of a great protest against Buddhism in China, and the emperor who followed Wu Zetian sort of reversed the influences of Buddhism, or tried to reverse the influences of Buddhism in China. Not only that, in the field of medicine, in the field of yoga, there are so many fields where Nalanda has fundamentally contributed towards the development or shaping our modern world.
Well, for more, I think you'll have to read the book. I will move on to my next question. We don't have much time, and I did want to open the floor for questions. So my last question today for you, Abhay, is, it was such a magnificent place and a center of knowledge. What led to the downfall and destruction of Nalanda?
Well, the Nalanda had, three. I examined the decline and destruction of Nalanda in three ways. The immediate cause of the decline and destruction of Nalanda was the invasions which started happening from the northwest of India. And these monasteries were considered as the centers of wealth. And Bakhtiyar Khalji particularly, he invaded most of the Buddhist monasteries of Magad, including the famous monastery of Odantpuri and Vikramsila and Tilhara. And he also planned to invade the monasteries of Tibet actually. And so the invasions which started because of the political vacuum which was created in North and Central India, and he raided these monasteries and looted them, burnt them, killed the monks. And Buddhism is a religion where you cannot be a priest by birth. You have to acquire priesthood. In the sense, to become a monk, you have to be ordained and you have to be knowledgeable. So that link was destroyed, and there was no place for monks to be ordained. So that was the immediate cause of the destruction and fall of Nalanda. But also there were two other factors, and the medium-term reason was the rise of Brahmanical Hinduism or Puranic Hinduism. So you can see that lots of Nalanda itself in the later centuries during the Pala period had become a center of Tantric Buddhism, which kind of was very similar to Hinduism. So in a way, sort of, it got absorbed into Hinduism. So you have a link, which is the Nath Sampradaya, the Nath school, which is by Baba Gorakhnath or Matsyendranath. These are the figures who are linked between, they are worshipped both as Buddhist, Vajrayana Buddhists and Hindus. So the third, which was the long-term impact, was the decline of patronage. Buddhism was a religion which continuously depended on patronage. So Palas were the last kings to patronize Buddhism. Buddhism was already in decline even in 6th century, actually 7th century, when Xuanzang visited, but in northwest India. But Buddhism was still very active and flourishing in East India, particularly in Magad, in Bengal and Bihar. So after 12th century, the patronage sort of petered out. There was very little patronage which was being given. More patronage was being given to Puranical Hinduism, deities, etc., and the places. So these were the three factors.
Well, I'll open the floor for questions now. So if you have any question, please raise your hand and we'll pass on the mic to you. The lady.
Hi, sir. My question is somewhat inclined to the Buddhist philosophical aspect of Nalanda. So, as His Holiness always emphasized the relationship between India and Tibet as that of the Guru-Chela relationship in the Buddhist philosophy. But now I feel like that with the Tibetan Buddhists being the guardians of Buddhist philosophy in the recent times, do you feel that the scenario has been reversed, that we are learning from the Tibetans? And how do you respond to the statement? Thank you.
Well, I mean, that's true actually, because, Nalanda has, in fact, Tibetan Buddhism, which is Tantric Buddhism or Vajrayana, has completely evolved at Nalanda from other two schools, Madhyamaka and Yogacara. So, Vajrayana, there are few countries which practice Vajrayana, and not only the religion but also the Tibetan script comes from Nalanda. And there is a very interesting figure called Thonbi Sambhota who came from Tibet. He was son of a minister. He came to Tibet, he came to Nalanda and studied Buddhism at Nalanda. And his most important contribution is borrowing the Gupta scripts, which was in vogue that time, and taking it to Tibet. So Tibetan script actually is completely out of Nalanda, both the script and the religion. So now, of course, what happened that in by 14th century, Buddhism was almost over in India. It was finished, and maybe survived in bits and pieces in parts. But today, most of the sutras, which were at Nalanda, they were carried away to various parts of the world, including Tibet and Nepal. And in fact, most of the, today sutras which we don't have in Sanskrit are actually available in Tibetan or Mandarin translations. And for example, we learn about so many. The most important sutra of Mahayana Buddhism is Heart Sutra. We learn about Heart Sutra, sort of, it gets translated back to to Sanskrit from Mandarin and Tibetan. So today, even I think most of these Nalanda sutras, which we say that were burned, you can find in the great libraries of Tibet actually, and in China. Also that there is Nalanda, in fact, was destroyed in India, but it was not destroyed in the world. You had at the same time in 15th century the great monastery of Phenpo Nalendra, because Tibetan call Nalanda as Nalendra, and so Phenpo Nalendra was founded in Tibet, and it sort of had a continuity. That I write in my last chapter of this book, The Global Footprints of Nalanda, that how Nalanda survived. It was not completely destroyed, and how Nalanda became many Nalandas all across the world. How new Nalandas have been founded in France and in Brazil and in UK and in Australia and so on.
We are almost out of time. I think one last question to the lady in the center.
What is your reading on the rise and fall of Buddhism in South India, mainly in Kerala, and any contribution to the Buddhism or to the literary or knowledge?
I think it's same as in Nalanda. The three factors I have mentioned, which is the invasions from the northwest of India, and decline of patronage and rise of Puranical Brahmanism.
Okay, would you just like to end with the poem that you've written, The Massacre of Nalanda?
I've written, actually, it's a part of...
it's a longer poem, but would you like to read a section?
It's just it's just a poet's view, maybe. Bakhtiar and his men play Buzkasi in my alleys today. Monks are being burned alive, and those who try to escape are beheaded. Dharmaganj, the 9-storied library, has burst into flames. Smoke and ash from burning books have turned the day into night. The sun has disappeared from the sky today, and even my bricks bleed. Sacred chants that once purified Magad have turned into shrieks of a falling humanity. The light of the world is fading today to face the ravages of time alone. Abandoned, scorned, forgotten, or perhaps to be reborn into many Nalandas.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abhay. It was wonderful talking to you about your new book, Nalanda. And thank you, all of you, for being here this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhay K. and Milee Ashwarya, for this engaging session.